In this video, I'm going to show you how to account for bonds issued between interest dates. Now, most bonds are issued the same day they are dated. For example, let's say we've got a 3-year bond that pays interest semi-annually on June 30th and December 31st, and it's due to mature on December 31st, 2026. So this bond begins on January 1st, 2024, and we presume that that's the date that the bond is issued, that it's sold to investors. But what if it's not issued until March 1st or until April 1st? Then we've got a situation where the bond is being issued between these dates, and we need to somehow account for it because the investor is buying the bond at a time when some of the interest has already accrued. So let's talk about how we'd account for that, and we'll do it with an example. Let's start by looking at a typical bond issuance. So we'll say that on January 1st, 2024, company issues 3-year bonds. They have a face value of $500,000, and there's a stated interest rate, and that's on an annual basis of 7%. And then we've got a market interest rate on an annual basis of 8%. Okay, this bond pays interest semi-annually. We've got the market rate. We've got the stated rate. We see that the market rate is actually higher than the stated rate. So the bond pays less interest than the market rate. So you know the bond is going to be issued at a discount. And in fact, if you do the calculations, the issue price of the bonds would be $486,000 or $486,895. And I've got other videos that talk about how to calculate the issue price of the bond, so I won't get into that. Here is our amortization table. Okay, so we start with our initial carrying value, which is the issue price of the bond. Okay, so we've gone over all this in other videos. What I want to talk about is this. We are assuming here that this bond is issued on January 1st, 2024, and then the first interest payment date is June 30th. But what if the bonds aren't issued until March 1st, 2024? So we've got all these dates, but for whatever reason, something happens that on January 1st, 2024, no investor buys the bonds. Okay, so it's 2 months into the bond, right? So it's January 1st to June 30th. That's going to represent 6 months of interest, but 2 months have already passed when someone buys the bonds. Okay, so this is just like the example we started out with, where the bond is not sold on the same day that it begins, right? So it's not sold to an investor on January 1st. So see that $17,500 of interest that is paid every 6 months? That very first interest payment on June 30th, that investor is going to get $17,500 of interest, which represents 6 months of interest. However, they only held the bond for 4 months. So is that right? No, that's not fair. We got to do something about that. Fortunately, there's an easy way to deal with this. Okay, we're basically going to set it up so that the issuer of the bonds, that's the borrower, they are going to demand that they receive the 2 months of interest, that be added to the issue price of the bond when the investor buys the bond. So they're basically saying, look, you are going to get 6 months of interest on that first interest payment date, but you're only going to have owned the bonds for 4 months. So there was 2 of those 6 months where you did not own the bonds. So why don't you give us 2/6? Okay, 2 divided by 6, so 1/3 of that 17,500. Okay, that was the interest payment, right? 17,500. 2/6 of that really should be given. It should be kept by the issuer, right? So the bond is basically, so we still got the issue price of $486,895. But the issuer is also going to get 1/3 of that first interest payment because basically the investor did not own the bond for 1/3 of that time. Okay, so this is 2 out of 6. Now let's say the bond had been issued, or the investor didn't buy it until 5 months had elapsed. Okay, then in that situation, you say, well, you know, the investor did not own it for 5/6 of the time. So instead of this being 2/6 that would be added to the purchase or to the issue price, then it would be 5/6. So it's whatever, this fraction right here is whatever fraction of the time that investor who is buying the bonds did not own the bonds during that first 6 month period. Okay, so we got the issue price plus 2/6 of 17,500 is equal to $492,728. So this amount, if you're wondering, well, what is this? What does this mean? That is the amount that the borrower, the one issuing the bonds, they are going to debit cash for that amount. That's the amount they receive. So normally, if the bond had been issued on January 1st as planned, they'd get $486,895 because the bond was issued at a discount. But they're also getting that accrued interest, right? Now, that the person buying the bonds is ultimately going to receive that 6 months, right on June 30th. So that's why they're going to credit interest payable for that amount. Okay, so that accrued interest is received by the borrower. They say, hey, look, why don't you give us that 2/6 of that first interest payment? But then, of course, they're going to have to pay that out 6 months in. So this is just added to the issue price. And then, of course, we debit the discount on bonds payable. We credit the bonds payable for the face value, just like we would with a normal bond issuance. So in short, the accrued interest, okay, in this case, it was 2 months of accrued interest that the investor was getting, even though they did not own the bonds for that time. That accrued interest is simply added to the issue price of the bond, and this makes everybody happy.